Hi, I'm Jamie. This is Dead Dodge Garage, and this is Greg's 1966 Belvedere II. You can tell it's a 1966 because it has single headlights, unlike the 67, which is roughly the same body, but has two headlights. And you can tell it's a Belvedere II by the trim down the side there, and the fancy emblem, Plymouth emblem there on that aluminum dish, which mimics the gas cap on the other side. Well, and the way it says Belvedere II on the dash. I was asked by a mutual friend of Greg and mine if I wanted to do engine mounts in a 66 Belvedere. At the time, I was like drowning in work. Not that I'm not now. But initially I said, I don't really wanna. Then, totally randomly, I was cruising around in my Dakota RT when I saw this thing driving down the road. I got pretty excited immediately. He just happened to be pulling over. Turns out he was having weird fueling problems, which we'll get to in a minute here. So I pulled over too, walked up and said, "Is this the one that needs engine mounts?" He said, "Yeah." As soon as I saw it, I was excited. Look at it. It's the perfect color. This thing is beautiful. This is like my dream color for a Mopar. I wish my Charger was this shade. It's roughly the color Tracy painted his Charger, although his has that blue flake in the clear coat, so it kind of appears purple. It's got 17-inch reproduction Kragers. I think I like them. It's got a disc brake conversion, obviously. There are some interesting details. For one, it's got this Hemi-style hood scoop. Kind of interesting. Also, there's no antenna here. It's there, and I really don't know why that is. Other than those couple little things, it's a very clean, very original appearing car, at least on the outside, and I love it. Look at this trim panel. It's like immaculate. So are the taillights. And the bezels could be cleaned up a little bit there. It's literally just dust. They're really nice. Here's that special gas cap. Don't lose that. Many of you will be aware that we own a 1966 Cornet station wagon, my wife's pride and joy. Similar lines, it's kind of got a long roof. At one time we sold that car, and she was kind of sad about it. So one Christmas, I bought her a 1967 Belvedere II to replace it. It had a 383, some holes in the floor, some holes in other places. It was terrible flat black, the seats were destroyed, etc. But it was a cool car. The 67 Belvedere II doesn't have this awesome trim. It's a little bit more plain. I don't mind plain, but I don't know. I'm really attracted to these 66 cars. Okay, there's one more thing on the outside of the car that kind of sticks out as being incorrect, and it's these big rectangular exhaust tips. That's an interesting choice. When we look inside the car, the story is a little bit different. As you can see, there are more than a few things that don't really belong here. The upholstery isn't factory correct either, although I will say it looks nice. Simple, straight lines. If you didn't know that wasn't stock, you wouldn't notice it. It's got factory type low back bucket seats with all the trim and the back panels and everything. Again, custom built covers, but perfectly tasteful. I really can't go much farther without pointing out this custom built center console. It's definitely not to my taste, and it's not to Greg's taste either. We're looking for a factory B-body center console, factory floor shifter, and all of the linkage to make all of that work. So that'll definitely be a change coming in the future. Cup holders, that's kind of nice, but still. I'm definitely not a fan of that shifter. The Kenwood stereo kind of helps to date this restoration. That looks like an early 2000s piece to me. It has the Sirius radio, but I don't think it does Bluetooth. That's very similar to the one that was in my Charger, which, yeah, garbage can. I'd say the Grant wheel is tasteful. Now this is really interesting. At first, I didn't think I liked it, but you know what? It's kind of cool. This isn't a race car. Does it need a gigantic tack right in the middle of the dash? I'm inclined to think it doesn't, but I do like how they actually formed the dash panel around it. That is a neat touch. There's a glove box in here. The door's not hinged. It's also weighted so it stays put. Someone put a lot of thought and effort into this, and it's not that I think it's terrible. It's just that, I don't know, I like my interior stock. Maybe that's just me. Compared to the Dodge of this year, the Plymouth cluster is simple. About as basic as could be. I do like the Plymouth emblem in the middle. That's pretty cool. The heat controls are here. The headlight and wiper switches are here. And the gauges are kind of tucked in around all that. Plus, of course, your standard cruising model rectangular speedometer in the middle. The headliner's been done, and it actually looks really, really good. Except a very slight frumpy area down there at the bottom of the C-pillar. This one does have all the chrome trim, just like the 66 and 7 Charger does. I don't think that's found on all models. It's a little thing, but I really don't like to be able to see wiring sticking down beneath the dash. It's not on my list today, but that would be a nice thing to deal with. Well, Let's take a look under that hood scoop. I'm sure we're gonna find a poly in here, right? Why doesn't the latch unlatch? Hang on, I need more hands. Yeah, had to give it the fawns. That always works. Ooh, big block. We're not actually sure what displacement big block this is. We're gonna find that out today. It's definitely a low deck engine. A tall deck engine like a 440 would have a number pad here. They're also physically wider. If you know them very well, you can tell right away. The intake is smaller, the valve covers are closer together, there's a bigger gap to the brake booster. This is definitely a short deck engine. The ID pad on a short deck engine is down here on the passenger side deck surface, right in front of the cylinder head, kind of below the distributor there. It's really hard to see, especially without a flashlight here, so no idea what it says yet. I guess they had to add that hood scoop and the corresponding hole in the hood to account for that gigantic air filter without a drop base, sitting on top of that Holley double pumper, sitting on top of a 1-inch carb spacer, sitting on top of a very tall Mopar performance intake manifold. I still don't know what the engine is. All right, we'll figure that out in a minute. For as nice and clean as this car is, and as well suited it appears to be to like car shows and cruising and stuff, there are a lot of touches here under the hood that kind of say race car. For example, champion aluminum radiator, electric fan, no mechanical fan, puke tank there, MSD ignition system, all that. It does have the aftermarket type booster, master, and prop valve system. You get that in a disc brake swap setup. We got ours for our wagon from Right Stuff Detailing, I believe. That's something people have been asking me about a lot. If it looks like that, it's probably a good one. Now, this is not what this car is here for, but I do want to use it to make a point. This. Now, the radiator's great. Doesn't look right, but that'll work very, very well. It's the cooling fan situation I'm concerned with. All we've got here is a generic stick-on electric fan on the front as a pusher. It's not a big deal, but note, it doesn't cover the entire radiator. It's just sort of stuck on there. To be reliably effective, your fan really needs to have a shroud that covers the entire radiator core. Now, mechanical fan setups often don't. I've put together many, many cars that way, and it works just fine. But my experience with these electric fans, not that good. It just really doesn't work that way. You want a fan over here, ideally mechanical, and ideally with a shroud. The electric can be good, but I would add a mechanical fan to this to use as your primary cooling setup. These days, an electric fan is the norm. Generally, that's going to be 2, and it's going to be in a fitted shroud. If your setup looks like that, cool. This is just a little less than ideal. And on the subject of cooling system components that aren't the greatest, these chrome water necks. I've seen holes corrode through these things in not very many years. I very much prefer factory there. It's a little thing. Obviously, if it starts puking everywhere, you'll know. Anywho, back to why this thing is here. Partially the same reason every car ends up here. It just doesn't quite run right. It sounds pretty decent, honestly, but it's just a little funky. So we're going to go through the carb tune, at least the idles and things of that nature, and we'll check the timing. Notice there's currently no vacuum advance, and we may well change that. There's currently no PCV hose. There's no PCV hose because there are no nipples on this intake manifold, or even spots to put them. So the nipple that would normally be used for the PCV on this carburetor is currently feeding the brake vacuum. I don't know what we're going to do with that just yet. I could put in a T, but that doesn't really seem ideal. The big issue is an apparent engine mount failure. Greg says you can hear the whole engine kind of clunking around, so he's been taking it pretty easy. We'll get this up on the lift, take a look at that. There are new mounts in the trunk. I did happen to notice there's an orange box in here, which is interesting. It appears to still be wired, but looking here, it looks like the distributor wires have been cut and run over to this MSD. So I don't know, maybe that's just here for a backup. Ah, yes. Teeing off that PCV line definitely isn't going to work because that line is already teed to an electric pump, and we definitely don't want the electric pump pulling in vapors from the PCV. As you can see, the pump is mounted there under the battery. Its existence tells us that there wasn't adequate vacuum to run the brakes. So that should tell us something about this engine and or the way it's tuned. In some cases, I'm able to improve the advance curve to the point that those are no longer necessary, but we'll see what we get in this case. The third issue is a really interesting one. It's particularly interesting because currently it's not happening. That day I saw Greg pull this car over to the side of the road. He was doing that because it was kind of cutting out. There was plenty of fuel in the tank, but this filter was totally empty. It was getting an occasional puff of like vapor out of the line, but that was it. There was no visible liquid fuel. I don't even know how the thing was still running like that. When it got here today, there was no visible fuel. When I fired it up to move it over here, there's fuel now. I gotta think about that one. Vapor lock? Rather interestingly, there is a race-style adjustable fuel pressure regulator hiding here under the puke tank, and I noticed earlier it was wet with gasoline. It's not currently, but it was. I don't know if this is an issue with that thing, or maybe we have a fuel pump issue, despite the fact that it's one of those fancy replaceable diaphragm performance units, or we've got a pickup issue, or there's another filter somewhere, or the sock is clogged, or we've got a bad line back at the tank. We'll get into that in a little bit. Let's see what this thing sounds like. Pretty decent. Little lazy. I'm not totally sure it's got full throttle. There's definitely going to be some room for improvement here. All right, here you go. It idles super low and not happy. When you roll into the throttle, the timing comes in and it jumps up. So that should give us a good hint at what we're going to have to do here. I just tried to lightly goose the throttle and rev the engine up in park, and it popped and died. Yeah, these are pretty obvious signs that it doesn't have enough base timing. We're leaving a lot of power on the table with the tune as it currently is. Oh! Base timing, 24 degrees, which honestly isn't that far off. Max timing, that's not good. That is not safe at all. So we'll be recurving this thing and potentially adding a vacuum advance. Now there is a possibility that that timing mark is wrong. And we're definitely going to investigate that possibility too. Unfortunately, it's like stop working on cars and go to the store and find dinner time. So we'll revisit this tomorrow. That shouldn't do that. So as mentioned, we really didn't know what big block this was. That casting number there confirms this is a 1971 or 72 400 short deck big block, which is really interesting. It's mostly interesting because it has a neutral balance harmonic balancer, which seems to indicate it has a forged crank. You saw me checking the flex plate bolts there. I've reinstalled the guard, but behind that guard is an external balance flex plate. It's got the weight chunk taken out of it for a cast crank 400. So those components are mismatched, but it doesn't really seem to vibrate at all. I kind of eyeballed up behind that flex plate to see what the crank looks like. It kind of looks like an aftermarket crank. So while I don't know for sure, I strongly suspect this is a 451 stroker. That really is just a hunch though. It could be a cleaned up factory crank and I'm totally wrong. I don't know, and there's no one we can ask. I did find the clunk noise, and it's this driver's side mount. Shocking, I know. These things are often broken. I'm gonna have to lift the engine and remove that entire bracket to get it down, then swap out the rubber, then put it back in. Oh, do admire the fancy Borgeson steering box right next to that mount. There you go. It's all loose and yeah, it's not in one piece. Nice. Yeah, that ain't opposed to do that. Why are they screws? I've actually never seen that before. Huh. The thingy's supposed to be like embedded in the rubber. Anyway, whoever designed that, it doesn't work. Here's the replacement mount. It says 440 source on it. It's better than that one, so now we're gonna put this on the bracket and reinstall it. Then we can get on to tuning. Why doesn't the 440 source mount have the locating tab? Well, that sucked, but it is in there. Good news, the timing mark is right. Bad news, the timing mark is right. I pulled the number 1 plug, checked the compression, and backed that up by using a screwdriver to, keep track of the piston coming up. It was definitely at TDC when the mark was, so we can be sure it's very, very close at the least. Here's what number 1 plug looks like. Super rich, super sooty, and it's kind of hard to tell, but I think the timing line is here. So that's weird when you consider that this thing has 46 degrees total. I may have made mention of an oil leak. Well, that could be related. Well, it's days later for some reason. As you can see, I've got the driver's side valve cover off because I decided to check the cam timing just for science. And according to my calculations, the cam is actually slightly advanced, favoring high RPM horsepower. I think that's fine. It may even be ground into the cam and it's actually installed with the marks dot to dot. I don't know. I'm not pulling the timing cover to find out. but it's definitely not wildly off. The way I did that, of course, straight edge across the two valve keepers, or retainers, or whatever you want to call them, and then a feeler gauge. The intake valve was lower than the exhaust valve at rest, 0 lift. So then I turned 180 degrees, lined up TDC 1 again, which I already verified was correct, and then checked them, and the intake valve was slightly lower than the exhaust valve, slightly bigger gap than before, which told me it's slightly advanced. The bolts on this cover were nice and even, and yet it seeped oil everywhere. So I guess I'll snug it a little bit more. I reinstall it. Hopefully I won't totally destroy this gasket. Usually these cork ones do okay, but a little bit of seepage, yeah, it's pretty normal. Something I always like to check, intake manifold bolt torque. They weren't like loose on this, but they were a little loose, so glad I did that. Distributor timing. As mentioned, this thing has like 46 degrees of total, which is just insane and can ruin things. I verified the timing mark is right. It's at least very, very close to right, so I'm gonna go ahead and believe that number. What I don't understand is why with 20-something degrees base timing, it still coughs out the top of the carb occasionally, which is an indicator that there's nowhere near enough advance. This thing is definitely stock. It appears to have the stock curve in it. I don't think it's been modified in any way. So I probably need to do that. Here's the fancy high-performance fuel pump removed from the Belvedere. You can see the horribly cracked diaphragms there. Good chance that's our issue. There could be something else too, but we'll start here. Also, I just noticed that is a 3/8 nipple. This might become a problem. Someone totally swapped this out for a full-length 3/8 fuel line. So that means the new pump is too small. Little dingus end. This is going to be like hot dog in a hallway in the fuel feed line. Yeah, that one no worky. Had to go find the 3/8 number. No one lists that as an option. Anyway, it's fine. Found the Carter number online and ordered it, and I'll have it in like 6 hours. And until then, I can't do anything. Yay! Anytime you're doing a big block Mopar mechanical fuel pump, you do want to go ahead and make sure that the push rod in there that runs it is good. When they start to go to crap, the end ends up mushroomed out. I can't really see the camshaft end, I could pull the plug and drag the thing all the way out there. But I think it's in good shape, seems to move freely, and I did actually bump the engine over with the pump hanging out here, and there seemed to be plenty of movement, so I think we're good there. In extreme cases, those things will wear out so badly, the pump arm will barely move at all, and that can lead to a really cool fuel starvation issue. I don't know why, but my neighbor's been sawzalling for like 3 days straight. Anyway, it's many days later, and I'm going to put that fuel pump in this car, and hopefully it fits. The new pump comes with one nipple attached and then some threads for the other one, which is really inconvenient. The fittings on the old pump, totally different. Thankfully, I bought this old Edelman cabinet from the local parts house, and there was one of the right pipe thread to 3/8 nipple-y thingy fittings in there. While I'm here and I'm thinking about it, I'm going to let you in on a little secret about the car parts industry. You see, I spent some years in said industry, so I happen to know some things. These pumps came out of the same factory. Yeah, that one says Napa on it, and it's sold at Napa. This one says Precision on it, and it's sold at O'Reilly. But look at the little details here. Made in Korea, exact same font, same style of sticker. The boxes are literally the same, but printed differently. They're like the same. Isn't that interesting? I think it is. So next time you're complaining, oh, O'Reilly parts are junk, Napa sells the good stuff, or AutoZone has the best parts. No, they don't. They all sell the same thing. Service sets, actually. Yeah, that's the game. But the parts, exactly the same in most cases. Now, I know I already pointed out this auxiliary fuel pressure regulator thingy, but I want to go into some more detail on that because it's something I've seen multiple times lately. In fact, I just deleted one of these on a 69 GTX. You may have seen that video by now, or maybe not. I don't really know how time works. Anyway, in most cases with a mechanical fuel pump, you don't need that. Stop drilling holes in inner fenders and adding these stupid regulators. There might be a case for one of those regulators with one of these high pressure mechanical pumps. Maybe. Possibly. I have been told by a few parties that these Edelbrock carbs really don't want to see more than 4 or 5 psi of fuel pressure. And that may well be true, but here's the thing. I've encountered many of these things in my years of doing this, and never have I seen one having needle and seat problems due to high pressure from a mechanical pump. I have seen it with one of these fancy electric pumps, you know? In the case you're using one of these, yeah, you pretty much have to have one of these regulators to keep that pressure down to something that won't make the carb angry. But with a mechanical pump, yeah, probably not. These factory style mechanical pumps and any of these performance carburetors, you will be just fine. You don't need a pressure regulator. But as usual, I will remind you, I'm not some expert. I'm just a guy. And I've only been doing this for 17 years now, so. Time to check for fuel leaks and make sure our new pump works. Well, it works. That's good. And, yeah, so far nothing pouring out the bottom. Huh. It's almost the same color as my Challenger, which really needs a bath. Poor thing. Well, good news, bad news. There's fuel in the filter, but I'm not seeing really impressive flow coming out of that line. See that little dribble of gas? That was kind of the issue we were having before. Ah! It's fine. It was only a little on fire. Almost burned my hand. Good thing I wasn't covered in gas. So, about that timing curve. Yeah, it doesn't even want to stay running. So, I'm just going to give it a random stab and see what that does. Huh. Oh, it sure sounds more responsive, but didn't magically fix everything wrong with it. And remember, with the curve in this thing, if I bump it to like 30 degrees at idle, it's like almost 60 total, so that's bad. What is with this thing? It's just mad all the time. I did verify the firing order, you know, just in case. Well, it's still weird and it doesn't make much sense. This cam must be ridiculous. Anyway, I've got the best idle at 36 degrees. Any less than that, it hesitates revving up and it's all pissed off. Now, I could back it down to like 16 and then use manifold vacuum to bring in more advance at idle. But then when you stop it, all that goes away and I guarantee it's going to be popping again under heavy load. So I think what needs to happen is that distributor needs to be locked down or shortened to like a 5 to 10 degree curve and then use the manifold vacuum. It's the only way we're going to get anything livable. This thing was definitely rich at idle before. When I've got it now, it's pretty good. It smells about right anyway. I would not drive it this way, but here's the throttle response now. It's still a bit rough coming up, and there are probably other reasons for that, but at least it's not shooting fireballs, that's nice. The front pump arm is adjusted wrong. That means the cam has to take up that amount of slack before the pump starts doing anything. That nut needs to be loosened so it takes up that whole space. I adjusted the actuator arm there, so that's good. One interesting note, these 750 Holley double pumpers, for whatever reason, they always ship with a 28 squirter in the front. And that almost always gives you a hesitation when revving up. The secondary side has a 31. My move is always to dig up one of those 31s and put it on the primary side. It makes a notable difference. There's other pump tuning you can do as well. You can change the pump cam down here, and I have a whole bunch of those, but just the change to the 31 squirter usually straightens all that out. It goes without saying that what every engine wants is a little bit different, but for most of these warmed over big blocks, that solves the problem for me. Here's what we've got now. pretty good throttle response, but again, you can hear occasionally that little hiccup. Yeah, I think we need the 31 squirter. To make this thing go, we're gonna have to get into this distributor. Unfortunately, they hardwired it to the car because MSD. That sucks. I'm gonna have to cut wires and things, but there's really no other way around it. We can't leave that curve how it is. If you wanna use your factory Chrysler distributor with the MSD box, that's fine. It works great, but do future you a favor and buy one of these 2-pronged connectors to splice onto your distributor. That way, it's actually serviceable. I tested the vacuum advance with my face, and it actually does work, so that's cool. I'm gonna compare to another distributor and make sure the reluctor's installed correctly because I've seen those backwards a good few times. I'll check the air gap to the pickup there, although I think it's good, judging by how it's really close, but not close enough to be making metal shavings. And then I'll take it apart and we'll do some welding. Well, this is cool. You're not gonna be able to see it, but looking in the hole there confirms a couple things for me. First, this is a Mopar purple shaft cam. I don't know which one, but it's definitely a purple shaft. And yeah, you can't see it at all, but the end of the fuel pump push rod is not mushroomed. Again, a good thing to check. This thing would definitely benefit from a valley pan reseal. I'm pretty sure that's the main source of the oil leaks. Maybe they just didn't use any silicone, or they did a terrible job, I don't know. Oh yeah, on that fuel supply issue, I'm gonna get this thing running and back on the road. We'll drive it and see if the filter is still emptying. If it is, we're gonna be looking at pickup. We're gonna be looking at the lines on the frame. If it stays roughly this full, it's pretty normal and we'll probably just call it a day. The light in my hutch died, which is terrible. Anyway, it's days later and I'm trying to get into this distributor, which I usually do right here. Unfortunately, the light thing happened and also someone, no idea who, left a horrible mess. Here we are in the guts of this distributor. I've decided I'm not gonna lock it out, but I am gonna shorten the curve to like 10 degrees. We'll see. It's not an exact science. But as you've seen me do on the channel before, I'm going to weld up half of one of these slots. I did notice this thing is already missing one advance spring. I think that's just a light spring. The heavy spring's gone. I'm going to find a second light to put in there. I don't know. It just gives me the warm and fuzzies. This weight was like wobbling around. When I went to disassemble this thing, it like came off of that and I couldn't get it back on to align things. So anyway. I think I'll go ahead and lubricate this stuff while I'm here too. And there you go. Weld it up. I couldn't be bothered to like fully grind it down, but it's pretty good. Still got to put another spring on there. This is all greased up and it actually like moves nicely now, so that's cool. You can tell right there how much smaller that slot is. I'm gonna say that's, I don't know, 10 degrees-ish. If you don't want to weld this, I think I've mentioned this before, but you can actually just buy a little limiting plate thingy that goes in there. I believe those are sold by FBO. There might be other options too. Distributor reinstalled, roughly pointed the right way. And I did make up a vacuum advance line, which I've got run to manifold vacuum. We'll have a 10-degree curve from that. We'll probably set the total timing to like 35, 36. It's pretty standard. So then at idle, it'll be 25, 26. The vacuum will add some amount of degrees, and that'll help it idle smoothly. Then when you floor it, that vacuum advance will go away, and that should help us prevent any pinging issues. Remember, when I started, this thing had like 46 degrees of total timing, which is just insane. So no matter what, it's gonna be safer and it should run better. Okay, I ended up with an 8 to 10 degree curve and I'm fine with that. But even with it set to like 26 at idle, it's still lazy and just mad. All right, let it be noted it wasn't fully warmed yet. Now that it is, it's a little less grumpy, so that's good. This is a big tall intake with no heat crossover. Anyway, that's what it sounds like now. You know, this thing does smoke a bit. Not in love with that. I think it needs to be taken out and like run. It definitely smells rich. I leaned all 4 idle screws out like a good bit and it still smells rich. This Holley's brand new. It's gotta have power valve blowout protection. But I don't know, maybe it popped during one of the many episodes of backfiring through the carb. I took out so much idle fuel it'll barely stay running. And it still smells rich. The fan is on. Yeah, the fan still runs after. That doesn't do a whole lot, you know. To be honest, this fan really doesn't do a whole lot in general. I mean, it's moves air in this ring here, but doesn't seem like much to me, but what do I know? Well, this is interesting. We definitely have a working vacuum pump, but this pedal just feels horrible. I don't remember it feeling like that before. Gotta drive it again and see what that's like. Unfortunately, no one's told Grays Harbor that it's summer yet, so it's raining currently. Have I mused about the random light where the cigar lighter's supposed to be? I don't know if I have. I don't know what it's for. Ah, okay, my random guess was correct. It's a shift light. There you go. I still have a lot of questions about this thing, and I think most of them will be answered by driving it. So that'll be a while. Oh yeah, there's an empty hole where the Volare used to be because I finally sold it last night at like 11 p.m. That's not a video, but it is a really long short, so you can go check that out. It's mildly entertaining. Finally, 10 minutes of dryness. Let's see what this thing's like on the road. It sounds like a party. I'm gonna have to bump the idle speed up because at least coldish, it doesn't want to idle in gear. Huh, that was actually still on the cold idle cam too. It's doing almost nothing. So I need to pull the air cleaner back off, come over to this side, get to the secret screw in there and raise that a little bit. The cold idle screw on your Holly is here. You can't even see it, but it's like sticking out there. Yeah, I used a pair of needle nose pliers. Way too much work to find the proper wrench or whatever. And you can't get it with a screwdriver. That should probably do something. Hey, remember that oil leak? I meant to check this. I might have even said I was going to, but I didn't. It's the oil pressure gauge line. Nice. The lower fitting adapter section was tight, but the cap, the piece that squishes the ferrule, you know, to make the compression fitting compress, was not tight enough. It was just snug. Hopefully it doesn't leak now. Yay! It sounds good. And it goes in here and doesn't die. So that's the good news, but oof. Yeah. I think it's using some oil. I guess I said that already. Hey, the brakes feel good now. That's the good news. I have got to start filming before runs. I never do that. So how are we supposed to know that I'm actually any good at this? As you can see, the road is dry, but there's still puddles in my driveway, so I'm taking it real easy. We'll just go down the road a bit, dry off the tires, and then we'll see what's what. That is not full throttle. Not even close. I actually did a video all about that a really long time ago that basically no one watched. If you don't get full throttle, you're kind of leaving some stuff on the table, aren't you? I'm gonna go back and fix that. And then we'll see what's what. The front end of this thing feels great. Remember, it's got a Borgeson box and some other nice parts on it. Yeah, I should have just been able to tell by where the throttle pedal is. It's maybe half throttle? Not a lot. I am hearing a whirring noise. That's interesting. I feel it in the box. Is this thing super low on power steering fluid? That's weird. It's not really low on power steering. I'm sure the fan will turn off eventually. Okay. Full throttle should look like this. Right? You can see the secondary throttle arm there ends up like almost vertical. Let's see what it does when I floor the pedal. Yeah, that's it. All right, it's better than 50%, maybe 60%. It's not good. Now, because this has one of those fancy low-car throttle setups, all I have to do is loosen one of these nuts, then I can adjust the other one, and that will raise the amount of throttle we're getting. Let's see what that looks like. Closer. Still not there. Wow. I feel like I made a pretty big adjustment, actually, considering this was sticking out almost as far as that. So let's just go all the way. Oh, it's so close. We're going right to the end of the adjustment. We'll lock it down with two 9/16 wrenches. Beautiful. Oh, that's with my foot like in the firewall, and it's almost there. Still not quite though. There's no adjustment on the firewall side, so I loosened this and spun that cable end in that way, effectively shortening the cable. So now we should hopefully be able to get full throttle. If it's now way past full throttle, I'll loosen that, and then it can be adjusted more later. If that didn't work, I could take the set screw out of this and shove the cable in farther, or more likely take it out, cut it, and reinstall it. There are lots of ways to adjust this, but that's the easiest one. Still only barely getting there. Wow. Yeah. I think that's just gonna do it. It's like 95%? No, it's not. It's only 90. Ugh. Okay, shortening that the rest of the way. Well, that's as snug as it could be. And in case you were wondering, yes, it is gonna be flooded to crap when I go to start it. Come on, full throttle. Yeah. Good enough. Let's see if it starts. I'll tell you, the throttle definitely feels firmer now, but that's probably a fine thing. With great horsepower comes great responsibility, you know. Yeah, PCB valve would be a great thing. I haven't come up with any way to do that, unfortunately. That might be a future issue. We'll have to find a spacer with a threaded hole in it. Yeah. Oh. May need to lubricate this now. Yeah, more on that in a minute. I take that back. It was the floor mat. According to my calculations, this thing should now be ridiculous. As long as we don't hear pinging, everything will be great. Let's find out. All right. I think it's actually got a stall. Because race car, of course. I don't know what I'm saying. I already knew it had a stall. I pulled the guard and looked and tightened the torque converter bolts. Yeah, it stalls around 3,000, I guess. It just popped out the carb. Does this thing seriously want more timing? It's definitely not revving freely to the moon. It's going to about 3,000 and just kind of hanging there. It reminds me of something. Mark's car? But now the question, does it want more or does it want less? I think we're really close where I had it. Yeah, let's try that. Liked more, not so much as a hint of pinging, and it went to like 3,600 before it fell on its face. What a weird deal. Let it be noted, brake vacuum went back down. This thing's giving me a headache. Manually shifted down into first. It pulled up to about 4,600 RPM. Well, there it is. The best vacuum reading I can get, which is like 11 and a half, and as you can see, not the most steady because camshaft. It does run pretty well that way, that's the good news. In many cases recently with these big blocks, I've been running the manifold vacuum on the pod there, and it'll usually help the idle quality, but the extra advance really didn't on this one. I'm gonna try running without it and see if it runs better. Oh, good news, everyone. I created an oil leak. The Thank you. Looks like the gasket for the fuel pump somehow got cockeyed off of one of the bolts. Luckily, there are always 2 gaskets in the boxes with these fuel pumps. I guess this is why. So you can screw one up without any major consequences. I could save that, but I don't even know how that happened. I had the bolts started in it. Actually, I do know how that happened. They're not factory bolts. Ugh, they're super short. Anyway, we will rebuild. Turns out I'm not perfect. I'm actually a human. And I make mistakes and little boo-boos too. And this is a great lesson. Double check everything, especially your own work. Now, of course, the good news is the pump just goes into the crankcase. So unlike the pressurized oil spewing out back there, it made a little mess, some drips and stuff, but nothing too horrible. Oh, pushing the push rod back up is way harder when it's hot. You're burning the crap out of yourself everywhere. And because the oil's all hot, it just slides right back down. All right, it idled in gear better with the vacuum advance hooked up. I'll tell you that. Let's see what it does on top. Yeah, it's exactly the same. It pulls to like 3 and then it just kind of flatlines. Yeah, it definitely likes running that manifold vacuum. So we'll leave that there. I'm gonna go put a few miles on it. It's certainly much better than when I started. It's so weird the gas gauge works in this car. If I'm to believe this gauge, this thing's cruising around at like 200, 205 degrees. Can't say I love that. Second gear, 25 miles an hour. It gets there. Yeah, it likes it a lot more if you drop a gear manually. I'm not sure the kickdown in this thing actually works. It's odd. It downshifts early, but also upshifts early. Here's the thing. This is not a drag car. It's not a race car at all. It's just a fun driver. And it's plenty fun now. This is just like bothering me, I guess. I don't know why it's like that. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around it. So does it kick down? Yes. But you really have to want it. Oh man. Yeah, good puff of smoke there. I'm really concerned about the ring seal in this thing. I was really hoping taking it for a run might help clear it out, but it's still smoking. Man, I just do not like this apparent blow-by issue. I can't tune blow-by out. The good news is, it's way better than when I started. The bad news is, there might be something going on in this engine. I just don't know. I do not have time to tear apart a big block right now, and it runs pretty well. It's not overheating, although it does run pretty warm, you know, because electric fan. It's got good oil pressure. It makes decent power. It's just a little weird, that's all. I'll tell you what, people get really excited to see this thing. In this weird, cloudy gray lighting, it looks like root beer brown, which is definitely not. No, we will not be doing burnouts in the Belvedere. Hey, I hit the road and manually shifted through the gears, and it did take off nicely. And I didn't see a horrible plume of smoke behind it. Maybe it is getting better. Or maybe if you just kind of take it easy, there's plenty of power and fun to be had. In case you're thinking thoughts, this just had a tune-up. The plugs, wires, I think even cap and rotor are like brand new. I did notice the gaps in the plugs weren't open very far though. I should probably take them all out and re-gap them. That might be a nice idea. The unfortunate thing is I'm really out of time for this, so that may have to be a project for the owner. Okay, it totally is getting better actually. I didn't wood it, but I got into it. I didn't see any smoke back there, so I think that's a good sign. This thing just needs to go out and run. For all I know, this could be a new engine. Yeah, good scoop in my life. Wow, I just learned the speedometer is actually accurate. Well, what did we learn? I'm actually not sure. Like I said, better. Time for a fair and accurate appraisal of the situation. It runs better. The fuel system is fuel systeming. It has full throttle. It drives down the road. It's pretty fun. It doesn't ping. It starts right up. It's definitely in a decent state of tune. However, it's not perfect. It runs kind of weird. It's got way too much camshaft. I don't quite understand it. It has strange timing requirements and fuel requirements. The four-corner idle is annoying and hard to balance. It smells. And we learned that I make mistakes and don't know everything. I know that will come as a shock. I'm still happy. And I'm pretty sure Craig's going to be happy too. This thing's awesome. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to say it's much improved, but a work in progress. And wrap it up for now. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you might have even learned something. And if you have any brilliant suggestions for me on your thoughts here, go ahead and drop them in the comments. Until then, thank you very much for watching. And remember, take your cars out and run them. They'll thank you for it. Or they'll break.